Hey man, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Welcome.
Whoa, that's great. There we go.
How's it going? I'm looking the wrong
Good.
way, I realize. I need to like arrange this all so it works. I can see closer to you.
Let's see.
The fuck is up with this waiting room bullshit?
Um, that's I don't know. That's in everything now. Even Teams is like that sometimes.
I swear I said I did not want that. But whatever.
Share screen. Okay, so I went to share my screen and it said host disabled participant screen sharing.
So I'm gonna add you. 1 second. Let's see. You should now be a co-host.
Perfect. Can you see that screen?
I see just your, yep, I
Okay.
see just your main screen.
Okay.
Do you want to try presentation mode?
Um, Let me, stop share, share screen, share. Okay, does that show my,
You're in presentation mode now. Can you still see your notes? Yep, perfect.
I can't see my notes, but I don't use notes.
All
I
right,
just memorize.
you're good then.
All right, and then stop sharing, share screen. Okay. I should be good. What about now? What happens if you try to share now?
Um, let's see. Oops. I need. Okay, wait. I got to remember how to do this. I think maybe I put it over here.
I see that.
I don't feel like that's right.
Threshold update initiatives.
Yeah, it's not how I wanted to share it though. Stop share. There you go. That's what I wanted.
Looks the same to me, but
Yeah, now. Why is this not working? What can you, oh, it's weird. I feel like I'm totally screwing this up. Okay, now I've got it.
All right, so you share now. I'm gonna see what happens when I try to share.
So mine goes to, I got like a little bit of talking here.
Okay.
Then I'm going to kick it to you. So now you try to take the share.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. The only problem, I can't click through slides. It seems like. Let me try this again. Maybe I gotta do. There we go.
That's clicking through. Yep.
Yeah. And then. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
And then, okay, so you finish.
I finish here.
And then I take it back from you. Whoa. That was weird. Okay. I think I've got it.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Cool. You all good?
Yep.
Feeling amazing?
Feeling amazing.
Looking good. Looking good over there.
You too, Dan. You too. You excited for the Big Ten to play?
Mildly excited about the Big Ten coming back.
You know, now the Pac-12 is just looking even more. It's like they're the nail in the coffin of them being irrelevant.
I imagine that they will come back as well.
Yeah, but they're saying like November or something.
For I didn't understand why that's the earliest they could start. To me, that seems odd.
Because yeah, I don't know. They need 6 weeks. 6 weeks to practice before playing, and they want to have these rapid testing machines at all the universities before they start practicing, and they think that'll be the end of this month.
Okay.
It's just it's so funny how like Oregon, the state of Oregon is literally like has the least COVID out of almost anywhere in the country. Yet they're like the most strict about it though too.
I mean, in all honesty, I don't know that there's going to be the possibility the Pac-12 plays just because of smoke for a month and a half.
Yeah, I think it's already going away in Oregon.
Hopefully that rain actually hits them. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, California, I don't know if there's much hope for here, but they should just go to a bubble. But Oregon already lost its they already lost a couple top players.
Oh, really?
But yeah, like Penei Sewell, he was like the guy, the top offensive lineman last year, which he like basically was the reason they were so good. He opted out, and then another couple like receivers have opted out.
Dude, I don't know. Those opt-out guys in the SEC are all opting back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's totally weird. I mean, not totally weird. I feel like it just changes all the time. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like how long the season can go and who ends up. Either the Pac-12 is going to look dumb or everyone else is going to look dumb. Like when all these kids start like getting hospitalized with mysterious heart syndromes or something, then the Pac-12, I told you so.
Don't say it.
Otherwise. Hey Bob, is it true that you live on the Paradise Golf Course? I hear next to
you. I'm looking out at the 12th fairway right now.
the 12th. Okay, you're on the 12th. That was like my new COVID habit is like where I actually started golfing for the first time in my life.
Oh, nice.
You're the third person I know that lives on that course now, so I'll have to look out for. You're the 12th hole.
We're actually on the 13th. So if you're looking at the house coming up 12, but the 13th green is right below the house.
And that's like the very top, right? The
very top, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, stop in, say hello. I don't see people anymore.
I've probably put a ball in your front yard before or backyard.
I'm sure you have. I have a huge collection. If anybody needs golf balls, I stopped collecting white ones and now only collect colored ones.
You sound like my boys.
I remember you expressing interest in the golf course out there because it was built on the meadow and we didn't have any data. Now I understand why. It's your back.
Yeah, this would be a great opportunity for SEC restoration. It's been off and on for sale, and it'd be a great property for the Conservancy to pick up.
Yeah, I know. I do really like it as a golf course, though. I gotta say. But there's others to play on.
Indeed.
Do you play at all?
I do not.
Yeah, I never thought I would, honestly.
Yeah.
But COVID makes us do things we never thought we'd do.
There are worse habits to have. Not many, but there are.
Oh, that's funny. I actually gave that habit up, I don't know, 5 years ago because it was nothing but frustration and I stink. But I tell you, COVID is getting me. I got my golf clubs out over the weekend just because it's like, all right, I got to get back out anyway. So
nice. Yeah.
I think, I thought I got rid of my addiction, but I think I might be back into it.
Hello, all.
Hey, Brendan.
Hey, Brendan, welcome.
Howdy. Thank you.
I think we'll give everyone maybe 1 or 2 more minutes for some last people to roll in. And then we'll kick it off. Hey, Nicole, welcome. Hey, Bill, welcome. John.
Hi.
Jennifer, welcome. All right, everyone, we've got a pretty full agenda. So I think I'm going to kick it off here, and I'm going to do something I think you're probably never supposed to do, but I'm going to deviate from the agenda a tiny bit, just because it's been so long since we last had this group together. So I thought potentially a little bit of context and a reminder of where we've been may be useful to kick us off and before we dive into actually the substance of the meeting. So if you'll indulge me in that quick assessment of where we've been, I'll just do that, and then I'll kick it over to Sean to get into sort of the meat of the matter. So this is the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group. And as a group, we have charged you all with helping provide guidance for us as we review and update our threshold standards. It probably bears no repeating to this group, but when we started this process, we had a little over 170 threshold standards, the vast majority adopted in 1982, when just after the compact was updated, directing TRPA to do that. And we have 9 different categories that you see on the screen right there. When we started this process, we engaged with the Tahoe Science Advisory Council, which was recently formed at the time, and really developed a work plan that was holistic in its approach to addressing and reviewing the threshold standards. And there are 2 elements of that work plan. There was what we've called the administrative side of that work plan, and that's the work we've done to reorganize, to adopt a system structure. And then there's the substantive side of that. We've referred to the substance of it as the individual threshold standards and the content of those standards. And we've got both of those items represented on the agenda today. So I'll be talking about the water quality work that we've been doing with the Tahoe Science Advisory Council, and that's really on the administrative side of it. And then Sean will be taking a deep dive into some of the more substance that we've been tackling over the last couple of years, and talking about the work we've been doing to update our SEZ monitoring and really set the foundation for an informed discussion about the establishment of a new restoration standard. And I think one of the questions, at least that I've received a fair bit over the last year or so, is why are we spending so much time talking about the system structure, and why is that even important? And especially probably members of this group are getting a bit tired of these discussions, or if you remember the last time we met, you're tired of these discussions, because we've already met and talked 5 times about the system structure. We've done a fair bit there in terms of bringing our standards up to best practice. And why we're so interested in that, and I think there's a number of reasons. Certainly the last peer review was incredibly critical of the overall structure of our standards, and how they thought some of them lacked rationale, how we lacked a link to evaluate program effectiveness and progress towards attainment of those standards, and really a logical chain of results between our actions and what the standards are trying to accomplish. But it wasn't really just external pressure to adhere to best practice that sort of motivated this. I think also when we embarked on this initiative, or the most recent attempt to update the threshold standards, one of the things we did was we reached out to a number of stakeholders and partners, the people that actually implement the standards, and asked them what they liked, what they didn't like, and where we should focus our efforts. And overwhelmingly, what we heard there is that people weren't at all familiar with what was in the threshold standards. And when we walked through the threshold standards with them, they were actually incredibly confused by the content and didn't really actually understand where we were trying to go with them, or what the goals were that were established in the standards themselves. And why is that so important to us? So here we're going all the way back to the bi-state compact that directed TRPA to establish these environmental standards. We refer to them as threshold standards. In the compact, they're formally referred to as environmental threshold carrying capacity, but then defined as an environmental standard. And you can see the compact both defines what these standards are, and then directs their use. So how we're supposed to use these. And we've highlighted, I think, some of the most relevant text there in terms of how the standards are supposed to be used, in that TRPA as an agency is supposed to adopt and then enforce a regional plan that will attain and maintain these threshold standards. So at the time, the notion of these new goals for the region was a new idea, and the compact gave the agency a little over a year to establish these, to establish them, and then another year to establish a regional plan to achieve and maintain those. And why it's so important to us that other people actually understand what's in the threshold standards is the regional plan is not implemented by TRPA by itself. The regional plan is implemented by the entire Environmental Improvement Program partnership. So there's more than 80 members of that partnership right now that are implementing projects, reviewing plans, doing all the work that's really necessary to actually achieve and maintain these goals. So it really is a collaborative effort to work towards these goals. And it's important that when you're organizing this collaborative effort and trying to get everyone walking in the same direction and marching to the beat of the same drum, that people actually understand what the overall goal is. And we're trying to have an informed discussion about whether the goals that we've got today truly represent the goals of the partnership today, or if they just reflected the partnership's goals in the past. And we actually need to take a firm look at what those are and how we should update them to better reflect where we're organizing that collaborative partnership and where effort is being invested today. And we've actually made a fair bit of work. The last 5 meetings that you've sat through, albeit over 18 months ago now, and listened to me drone on about the subject, have actually resulted in some tangible progress. So some of the early work with the Science Advisory Council led to the standard reorganization. And one of the things, if you remember way back when, the standards were organized, if you will, as these sort of broad statements and just narrative text that sometimes focused on the actions that we're interested in and sometimes focused on the overall outcomes. And so one of the things, we made a couple simple changes at the suggestion of the Science Advisory. Some of them as simple as, hey, you should number these standards so that we can actually figure out which standard you're talking about when we're having a discussion about updating this standard or updating that standard. The other thing that the council continued to emphasize for us is that we should focus more on what we want and not the why for how to get there. And one of the interesting examples is this first reorganization we did where we've got a couple nearshore standards that are really aimed at promoting clarity of the nearshore. And in the original articulation of them, it said, decrease sediment load as required to attain nearshore values, and nearshore values being certain levels of turbidity. And one of the things that came up in numerous conversations with the Science Advisory Council was, are you still sure that the best science points to it being sediment loads that are responsible for nearshore turbidity declines? Or is there a chance that there's nutrient loads? Is there a chance that AIS are contributing to it? And the notion that we shouldn't be embedding the specific way that we think we're going to attain these thresholds in our goals themselves, that we should really be focusing on what it is that we're actually trying to achieve or maintain, and not the mechanism by which we get there. And I think that's sort of broad context for where we've been. So now I'll shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to kick it over to Sean in a minute, but I wanted to provide a brief introduction to the work that we've done on stream environment zones. So as you'll all remember, stream environment zones were one of 4 focus areas that we identified at the outset of this initiative, where we would really focus our efforts on updating the content of the threshold standards. So those were stream environment zones, vehicle miles traveled, our recreation standards, and our forest health standards. And the work that Sean's going to describe is consistent with the recently adopted overall structure for the threshold standards, where we established minimum criteria for ourselves and for review of threshold standards and articulation of new ones. And there was 3 things that I think we should focus on today that are critically important in this discussion. So we said all standards going forward will be specific. We said all standards will be measurable. We're going to be able to define progress. We're not going to set targets for ourselves that we have no idea where we stand relative to that target. And finally, we said they're going to be outcome-based. And when we took a look at our existing stream environment zone standards, one of the things that we've acknowledged in the past is that they don't necessarily live up to those high criteria that we've established for ourselves. So we have 4 standards related to stream environment zones within the region. The first being preserved naturally functioning SEZ in their natural condition, which sounds like a great objective, except we never mapped where naturally functioning SEZ were or defined what their natural hydraulic condition was. Second, we said restore all disturbed SEZ lands and undeveloped, unsubdivided lands. Another seemingly great objective, except the disturbed SEZs and undeveloped, unsubdivided lands were again never mapped. So it's hard to assess progress towards them. We established a target of 25% of SEZ lands that have been identified as disturbed, developed, or subdivided, that we should restore those. Again, another specific challenge for how do you measure progress towards this, because the baseline has never been measured. Further conversation, especially with implementers, has suggested that it's hard to restore land that has just been subdivided but not degraded. What does that mean if something has been disturbed on paper but not actually disturbed in the environment? And what does it mean to restore it? And the 4th standard there is to attain a 5% increase in the overall naturally functioning area. And you probably know where I'm going with this, but again, the baseline was never developed for that. So we don't know exactly where we stand relative to it, although each year we're making a best guess. So I think for about 40 years now, ever since the standard was adopted, we have been dutifully tracking the amount of SEZ in our region and the overall amount that's been restored. But what we've done and the approach we've taken is sort of taken a black and white approach to environmental quality. Functionally, we've said that an SEZ is functioning or it's not functioning. Either it's restored or it's degraded. And I think one of the things that the last peer review challenged us on in a fairly serious way was, hey, this sort of black and white approach that ignores overall quality and function of your streams, of your meadows, of your riparian areas is pretty outdated at this point. And that you actually need to start introducing a metric beyond just the area you have and really start to say something about the quality of that area. And what Sean's going to describe really is an attempt for us to come to a comprehensive agreement on what are the most appropriate measures to assess the quality of an SEZ, and then apply that to SEZs in the region. So maybe I'll pause for a moment for questions. And if there are none, I will kick it over to Sean to describe that work in more detail. Questions, anyone? All right, Sean.
All right, thank you, Dan, for the wonderful introduction. Let me get this screen up here. Can everyone see that?
You're good.
Yes.
All right. Well, I hope you're all doing well there. I know most of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sean Tevlin, Environmental Specialist here at TRPA. I do a lot of the monitoring work related to TRPA's different thresholds. So I'm going to talk about our monitoring of SEZ and how that's going to play into the SEZ threshold updates. So the 2 main products we've been working on are the baseline condition assessment of SEZ and the SEZ monitoring plan. And as I'll talk about, and as Dan talked about, these are going to be a foundational piece of the SEZ threshold update. And the main thing I'm going to talk about is this SEZ baseline condition assessment, which is an assessment of the current conditions of SEZ on a basin-wide scale. So I'm going to talk about kind of the 5 major steps we took to complete this assessment, or we're almost done completing it. It's near completion. So I'll talk about the stakeholder engagement, talk about the indicators and methods we use to assess SEZ condition, talk a little bit about the data collection and data processing, and then I'll show you a draft of the baseline condition assessment as well. And just so you know, this is like a 50,000 foot view of this project. The methods are very detailed and we've hashed those out with the technical advisory committee. So I'm just going to keep it really high level. But if you ever want to dive into the details, just let me know. So a little bit of background on this program. Dan kind of talked about it a little bit, but so after 2016, the last threshold evaluation, it became clear that there was really no basin-wide monitoring of SEZ. We just simply reported on the amount of acres restored, and we got criticism for that. So we knew we needed a more scientific-based approach to this. So to start this monitoring assessment program, we were able to obtain an EPA grant in 2017. And as part of that grant, we initiated a technical advisory committee to help develop this monitoring assessment program. And that was made up of a bunch of different stakeholders in the basin that have a part of SEZ restoration or protection. With that grant, we were able to also bring in experts that have been able to provide technical assistance developing this program. People like DRI, Nichols Consulting Engineers, so that's been great. And then we've spent the last 2 summers, TRPA staff, as part of this grant, going out and collecting all the data needed to complete this baseline condition assessment. And so as Dan talked a little bit about the underlying idea here, how this is connected to the threshold update is to set a new SEZ threshold, we need to understand first the current SEZ conditions and then also how to measure change in SEZ condition over time. So the 2 projects I'm going to talk about are related to those questions. So the SEZ baseline condition assessment is going to establish current SEZ conditions, while the SEZ monitoring plan is going to show us how we're going to detect change in SEZ condition over time. So for this project, like I said, we had a technical advisory committee. It's made up of 10 to 15 different groups. Everyone from the Forest Service, CTC, to Nevada Resource Conservation District, federal agencies, local agencies, League to Save Lake Tahoe. So a bunch of different people have been involved. We've had 4 full group meetings since 2017 at all the major decision points, which is not that many meetings, which is great. But also, I think the more important part is we've had countless individual meetings with all these partners since 2017. We've had 4 different Forest Service staff members that have been intimately involved, from their ecologists to their hydrologists, multiple CTC staff members, and then all the rest of these people have all been deeply involved in really minute details, such as really digging down into the methods, scoring systems, all that sort of stuff. So we feel really good. When we started this project, the first meeting we had, there was a lot of I don't know, hostility maybe. It didn't go well, but now we've gotten to the point where there's not 100% agreement on this project, but everybody knows what's happening and has given the thumbs up for the most part. So we feel really good that everyone's been involved and we're in a good place with our partners. So now I'm going to talk about the baseline condition assessment, which, as I said, is assessing current SEZ conditions. So I'm going to talk about the 5 major steps we took to complete this assessment. So the first most important step is you got to agree on the most important functions that SEZs provide. So what are these critical functions that you're trying to protect? And these things, you can see them, they're listed here. They range from things like reducing sediment and nutrient pollutant loading to promoting natural soil productivity, and others in between. So that's really the first step, is what are these critical functions that you're trying to protect? Once you agree on that, then you can start moving forward. So then the second step is choosing measurable indicators that relate to these important SEZ functions. So we started out with about 25 potential indicators. That's obviously way too many to measure. So we narrowed it down to 10 of the most important ones using a selection process that I'm not going to go into, but we were able to narrow it down to 10. And these condition indicators are listed here. You can see they go from head cuts to conifer encroachment, fish passage, a bunch of different indicators. And depending on the SEZ type, different indicators apply to different SEZ types. So for example, a meadow does not share all the same indicators as a non-perennial stream, but they all pull from this list of 10. And now I'll just go over a couple of the indicators just so you have a general idea of what we are looking at. And this is really just 50,000 foot level again. So one of the indicators, vegetation vigor. What this is it's a measure of vegetation health. And basically, healthy meadows have access to shallow groundwater and therefore have vigorous vegetation. As that meadow becomes degraded, the groundwater often drops and the vegetation is less vigorous. So this is really a proximate for groundwater depth here. Another indicator is channel stability. And so what this is really, we're just looking at unstable eroding stream banks. And the reason this matters, we know stream bank erosion is a large contributor to fine sediment to Lake Tahoe. It can be a sign of overall system instability as well. Another indicator, habitat fragmentation. This one we're looking at development within SEZ. And when I say development, I'm talking about baseball fields, golf courses, any sort of fill, impervious coverage. And the reason this matters is development really impacts all SEZ functions, because we're really talking about SEZs that are no longer there. They've been built on top of. So that's very important for obvious reasons. So that's just 3 indicators that we're looking at. I won't go through all 10 of them, but that's just a general idea of what we're looking at when we are assessing SEZ health.
Sean, could I ask a question here?
Yeah.
The one that struck me, and one that I don't understand and you didn't go over, is biotic integrity. That seems to be kind of,
So that one,
is that something more than subjective, I hope?
oh yeah, it's very, so that one is for streams, for perennial streams, and that is basically using the bugs that live in the stream, things like mayflies, stoneflies, and it gives you an overall score of the overall biotic condition. So that's using something called the California Stream Condition Index that the State Water Board and CDFW use. So it's a really well thought out program. We already have an established program at TRPA, so we were able to just plug in data there. But you basically get a score for each site based on the bugs that live in the stream, of how close it is to what a reference condition stream would be.
So you can monitor it basically by capturing the bugs and doing the kind of field work that you do to determine the integrity of the stream.
Exactly, yeah. They get into a lab and it gets entered into like a model that, you know, is observed versus predicted. It's a really cool system that the state of California has that we've been a part of for a while. So we're just using a lot of existing data with that one.
Thank you. Appreciate you clarifying that.
Okay, so then the third step is you got the indicators. Now you got to actually choose methods to measure those indicators. So a few things about the methods. The first thing is they need to be repeatable and feasible given budget and staff constraints. So you can have the best, most scientific monitoring plan in the world, but if you can't actually implement that with your given budget and given staff, then it's not going to work. So we really had to be careful about making something that was doable on a basin-wide scale. The other thing about methods is that whenever possible, we utilize existing methods and protocols from other programs. So stream monitoring, wetland monitoring, meadow monitoring, it's not really a new science. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So we borrowed and stole from existing protocols whenever possible to fit the needs of the Tahoe Basin. So we use protocols from the Forest Service, the state of California, a bunch of other peer-reviewed protocols. So that, again, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There were a few that we needed to come up with our own for, but for the most part, we were able to take from existing protocols. So you got the protocols and methods outlined. Now the fourth step is actually going out and gathering the data. So we have hundreds of meadows, hundreds of marshes, lots of wetlands, hundreds of miles of streams in Tahoe. So the question is, how do you measure them all? And there's a really complicated answer to that, but I'm going to give you the simplified version of that, which is it's really a combination of field and remotely sensed data. So there's this new technology, remote sensing, that allows us to collect data that you normally would have to go out in the field to do, and you can do it from your desktop computer. And the amount of information that you can get with this new technology, things like LiDAR and other like vegetation monitoring programs, is pretty impressive, and it saves so much staff time. The second part is there's also lots of existing SEZ data from partners. So while there's a lot of sites that no one's really ever studied, there's sites that are really well known that have been studied throughout the years by whether it's the state parks or the Forest Service or the CTC. In those sites, we don't need to go out and duplicate efforts. We can just take their data where it fits into our indicators and just use the existing data that's out there. And so then after the remote sensing data and after the existing data from partners, we're left with some data gaps. And that's where, like I said at the beginning, TRPA staff has spent the last 2 summers out at these sites filling in all these different data gaps. All right, so now the final step is actually making sense of the data. So I think we've all seen, if you've ever worked in any sort of scientific modeling program, you've seen giant spreadsheets or stacks and stacks of field sheets that give you really detailed information, but they don't necessarily always get used. The data never really gets used in a lot of situations because there's no way to give it perspective and, you know, give more meaning to it. So the way that we were able to put our raw data in perspective and give it meaning is we used a rating system where basically the data is scored A, B, C, D, where A is good, D is bad. And again, here we're using existing scoring systems whenever possible. So a lot of these different protocols have a scoring system built in. So if that was the case, we're just going to take that scoring system and use it for ourselves instead of having to reinvent the wheel. So you can see an example here. These are just a few of the indicators, and you can see how it works. There's the indicators, and then there's the 4 different, we're calling them bins. So like the D, very degraded bin, the C, degraded bin, the B, the healthy bin, and A, the very healthy bin. And depending on what your raw data says, it fits into those 4 different bins. So we have that for all 10 of our indicators. So then what you're left with.
Yeah, I'm sorry, a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So, and maybe it's in the background staff report. So when I'm looking at these indicators and then the buckets for scoring, are these, how do you determine this? Is it by stream reach? Is it by the entire length of the stream? How is this?
Yeah,
How is this thing kind of aggregated? Because I just know, like, you know, third and then, you know, there's just different stretches of streams have different conditions.
Right, for sure. And that was a really, when the original, some of the original stream ratings for TRPA, where they rated like the whole Upper Truckee as one.
Right.
And so I had a slide for this for our technical advisory committee. So I'll try to remember the best that we did it. But basically, we broke up these systems by changes in condition. So when you're out there, and if you're in an area where it's like pretty clear that this area below a certain culvert is maybe, you know, 85% eroded banks and vary in size, that's going to be its own assessment unit. And then upstream of that, if it's a different condition, it'll be in its own assessment unit as well. So we used within man-made areas, like developed areas, there's a lot of change in condition, more than there are in like wilderness areas. So within these urbanized areas, sometimes the assessment units are pretty small because there's so many different changes in condition. But we had to balance trying to be accurate with like summarizing the condition of a unit without breaking it into like a million different units. So some of the sites are, like some of the stream sites are probably 500 meters while others are 5 miles, depending on where it's located. And then we also broke it up by like stream, like if it's a meadow that goes from a very steep sloping groundwater fed meadow to more of a floodplain riparian meadow, like we try to break it up like that as well. So there's a bunch of different rules that are in the document for how these were all broken up. But as you'll see in the web map that'll show you, they're broken up into a bunch of different units. Probably there ended up being 400 plus different units around the basin.
Great, thanks. And then, so then we'll have that information by those 400 plus units.
Exactly.
Be aggregated up, because I agree that, you know, hindsight's 2020, but you know, some of the early assessments that just says stream X is in medium condition isn't that helpful when stream X has multiple conditions up and down the stream. So.
Right, yeah, that was a major part of the way that we tried to break these up to avoid that problem.
Right.
Okay, so then what we end up with is a scorecard for each SEZ in the basin. So this is an example scorecard. You can see here the different indicators listed, a quick description of the indicator, and then that value is basically the raw value. And then the rating is that rating in those 4 different bins of those raw values. And the score there on the right is basically just an A score equals 12 points, B equals 9 points, C equals 6, D equals 3. you end up with an overall score. For this site, it'd be a 47% about, which is a really bad score, a D. So that's how the whole rating system works. And like I said, we're not completely done yet. We're very close. So, but what we have here now is we have really the first ever baseline condition assessment of current SEZ conditions across the Tahoe Basin. So now what we're able to do is we can assess current conditions of SEZ on a basin-wide scale with actual scientific evidence, where it's not just what somebody said. You can actually look back at those 10 indicators, look at how it was measured, look at the value associated with it. So it's all linked back to a scientific evidence. So now we'll be able to say things like how many acres are healthy versus how many acres are degraded, how many acres are in different condition classes. We can also look at restoration effectiveness. So a lot of restoration projects are, monitored for 3 years really heavily afterwards, but we're able to look back at a site, let's say that was done in 1990, and we have the current score. We can look at, is this site functioning at a high level like it was supposed to be, or has it dropped back off since it was restored? We can also look at where degraded SEZ is in the basin. If we want to look at only where the most degraded sites are, we can easily do that. And another thing is we can also look at climate impacts. The remote sensing of vegetation vigor, which is done by DRI, we can look back all the way to 1982 and look at the vegetation vigor of each meadow in the basin and how it's been changing over time. And we are seeing definite climate impacts on a basin-wide scale. So really cool stuff here. And so also, this baseline condition assessment is really going to lay the groundwork for the SEZ monitoring plan. So with this condition assessment of current conditions, we're looking at, we have the methods laid out, we have the indicators laid out, we have the scoring system laid out, the protocols, and the monitoring plan is really just going to then figure out how we're going to track changes based against this current baseline. So most of the hard work is pretty much done.
Hey, Sean,
Yeah.
could you expand a little bit on, there's the 10 indicators, but not all 10 indicators are applied to every site. So there's this situation where different types of SEZs can have different total scores. Can you talk a little bit about what those differences are and then how you can compare different SEZs to each other?
Yes. Okay. So we have the different SEZ types we're going with in terms of scores are, we have channeled meadows, which actually channeled meadows use all these 10 indicators because it's kind of a combination of the stream and the meadow. Non-channeled meadows would use everything except for, fish passage, biotic integrity, and channel stability, I believe, because there is no channel, and channel incision. Then we have perennial streams, which is head cuts, incision, channel stability, biotic integrity, habitat fragmentation, fish passage. We have non-perennial streams, which is everything except for the biotic integrity, because you can't really measure biotic integrity in a stream that dries up most of the year. And those are the 4 major categories. Things like more traditional marshes actually have all the same indicators that a meadow does, just because it shares enough similar characteristics. So that's how that all works. So in terms of comparing them against each other, it's not going to be a perfect comparison because they do have different indicators and different potential points possible. But at least from the initial run through, because we are using an overall percentage at the end, it seems to work out in terms of that. If you end up having 65%, whether that's a meadow or a non-perennial stream, that universally means that it's getting dinged in a lot of categories and it's not good. Whereas if you have a pristine system, whether you use all 10 indicators or just 6 of them, you're going to end up getting a really high score. So perfectly scientific speaking, you might have a little trouble comparing them to each other, but I think that once you see the scores, it definitely passes the eye test in terms of how it all works out. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that was an important piece to clarify, because in the past, SEZ has just been talked about as a single topic, and all SEZs were treated equally, and we recognize there's different SEZ types. So What's happening now is you're able to assess these SEZs by type. And although you may not be able to compare a channeled meadow to an ephemeral drainage, you can compare trends that are happening, and you can group them into one of those 4 categories. So I think it's an important distinction that we now have types, and we can track by those types, and we can assess trends, because we were not able to do that in the past. And I think that is the significant step forward that's going to really inform not only condition, but decisions moving forward in terms of where we want to make investments or how we want to make policy changes.
Right. Yeah. And we can definitely look at, we'll be able to say like, you know, oh, this percentage of channel meadows are disturbed as opposed to only this percentage of perennial streams. So maybe we have a bigger issue with meadows and not stream, you know, things like that. So yeah, definitely being able to separate them is very important. So this is where, okay. So now, so the cool thing about this is, yes, we're going to put together a multiple 100-page report on all this. That's all great. And yes, we have all these GIS layers that people with GIS can look at, but we also have a public web map. And let me share this. Can you all see that? Yes, okay. This is our fantastic GIS team helped put this together. And this is basically a web map where all our data is stored. So you can look at all sites. And this is a draft version. We're not totally done yet. So when you do look at this, we can't get into too many details about, oh, why does this site say this or that? Because it's not completely finalized yet. But in general, it's mostly done. You can look at all sites on a basin-wide scale. And you can look at the different color coding system is in the legend here. So you can see the final rating, whether it's an A, B, C, or D, or if it hasn't been scored yet. You can also look at, you can open this little table right here, and this will give you all the sites in the basin, depending on what level you're zoomed into. But you can do it by rating. So if you want to look at just all the most degraded sites in the basin, you can do that. You can look at by who the primary owner is, by SEZ type. And then also, it's clickable. So if you want to click on it, it takes you right there. So that just took us to the Upper Truckee Marsh. This takes us to Johnson Meadows. So it's a really good way to kind of jump around and explore. And then if you want to get more detailed, you can actually click on a site. So this is Johnson Meadow in South Lake Tahoe. And what you get is all the data. You get like the points possible, a final percentage, the rating, acreage, SEZ type. And then you can also, for people who really want to dive deep in, you get to look at, you know, what was the incision ratio? Where did that data come from? And you can look at all the different data for it and where the data sources are. So this is really daylighting all this stuff so that in 20 years, when we look back at this, people don't wonder where we got this information from. It has like a comment section where it's just a general site description. If there's any projects that happened in the past or a plan, they're going to be listed here. And then you also have site photos, so you can look at what the site looks like. So yeah, you can scroll around and look at as much or as little data as you want. Another cool thing is if you want to turn on other layers, you can turn on things like where are all the head cuts in the basin? You just turn on that layer and look, a bunch of head cuts pop up over here. If you want to see where the incision locations were measured, you can see it right there. Where the passable or impassable culverts are, they're right there. Ditches and gullies, that layer turns on. Stream bank stability, we can look at where eroded stream banks are and where stable stream banks are. So you can really either look at it from a very broad view or you can get really detailed. Another cool thing about this, let me turn off these other layers, is that we can look at historic imagery as well. So we have a 1940 and 1969 imagery. So you can turn that on. You can look at what things used to look like. And then I've left the development layer on. So this is impervious cover in golf courses and such. And you can actually visualize where the development is within SEZ. And a lot of people know where this development is, but to actually be able to visualize it like this is really powerful. So this is like the grocery outlet. This is the Motel 6 right in the middle of the marsh. So there's lots of cool visualization tools like that. And there's also things like you can look at, if we want to look at conifer encroachment, we can zoom in here. This is Trout Creek above Pioneer Trail. We can zoom back and forth between, let me turn this off real quick. So you can zoom back and forth between current imagery and 1940 imagery, and you can see how much conifer encroachment is taken over. And then you can actually look at the LiDAR data we use to assess this indicator, and you can turn on this is basically all the conifers and meadows in the Tahoe Basin. So that you can turn that off and on against the 1940 layer to really see where conifer encroachment has occurred in meadows in the Tahoe Basin. So that's just a few of the cool little things you can do with this. The major point of all this is that it really allowed our partners to look at all the sites that they care about and to make sure that the photos are correct, the site descriptions are correct, the data is correct, because a lot of people don't necessarily have GIS, or they don't want to take the time to go through all these different layers. And this just allows our partners to make sure everything looked right from their end, which has been extremely powerful. And I think this will be a really great tool going forward just for, communicating to the public or to different stakeholders. Does anyone have any questions about the web map?
I just had a quick one, Sean. I think it's awesome. I love this tool. Something that stood out to me, and I bring it up because I just want to make sure we're passing kind of the laugh test, is the polygon over the Tahoe Keys, the Pope Marsh, which is basically entirely developed.
It is.
It rates as a C, versus some of the other meadows around it rate as a D, the upper
Right.
Truckee River next to it. That just really stood out to me as kind of shocking that we would consider we could even evaluate something like that one, but to actually call that a C.
Right.
I was pretty shocked about that. I don't know. It's pretty in the weeds comment, but I just wanted to bring it up now that we're talking about it.
Yeah. We had similar discussions in the technical advisory committee about this, and we had talked about possibly using like a weighting scale to weight certain indicators more heavily so that it showed up. So right now, percent developed of a meadow or a marsh or whatever is just one of the 10 indicators used. So as long as everything else is really good, which like at Pope Marsh, most of the other indicators pointed out to being somewhat functional, it's going to end up with a decent score. However, we could change that with the rating scale, but I also think, and this is just me throwing this out there, so Dan, you can stop me if you want, but I think tracking development and removing development within SEZs is almost like its own category, because the way that we have it set up now, you could remove, a large portion of the development. Let's say the Tahoe Keys, that's probably never going to happen, but you could still remove like a pretty good size acreage and it's not going to show up in the score that much. But if we tracked it separately, then the 10, 20 acres that you restored of that would show up as a very strong project. But I understand what you're saying. That is probably one of the weak points of it, and one of the challenging parts is just using all these different indicators together. And the development one, especially, I can't think of very many other examples. I really think that Baldwin or the former Pope Marsh is really probably the only one like that. So it's up for discussion. The technical advisory committee has talked about that sort of stuff, and I'm open to any ideas on that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Let me get back to the presentation. Okay. So the next steps are really we just finished up our field season for 2020, finishing collecting data, finishing a little early because of the Forest Service closures and all the smoke. We just finally we were going to go for a couple more weeks, but we're pretty much calling it. We just finished the remote sensing scoring methodology for vegetation vigor with the help of DRI and the Forest Service. So now we just need to add those scores into the final scores and add that field data in that we collected this year to those final scores. Then we'll have final results for each SEZ that we monitored in the basin. Then it's just a matter of actually finishing the documents for the baseline condition assessment as well as the monitoring plan. And then, like I talked about, we'll be able to use this baseline condition assessment to help set a new SEZ threshold with scientific backing. And then the monitoring plan will just establish how we're going to measure a threshold change over time. So that's really it. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And yeah, thank you.
Sean, if I can jump in, it's awesome to have this larger inventory. I think it's obviously the most complete inventory we have to date of where we are. That said, it's clearly just a snapshot in time in terms of where we are. And I know if we look at a lot of our thresholds that were established, it's trying to get us back to some condition as of a certain time. And your last point there, I think, on your slide is the one that interests me most right now in terms of like, how do we then use this information to set a threshold, right? How can we use this good understanding of where we are in time and space right now in terms of setting a trajectory for where we want to be? And so I don't know if that's a question for Dan or, or you or how, or this whole group, but those are the questions that come to my mind. Again, I appreciate all of the work I was drug along with the process in terms of the working group over the last couple of years, and know that it was a huge process and a huge effort. So kudos to you and the rest of the folks that put this together. The map is awesome. We have a clear understanding of where we are. I think it's now just a question of how do we use this information to set a meaningful threshold standard and as you said, then track progress and see how we're doing to achieve that goal.
Right, and I think I'll probably let Dan ask that question unless he wants to let me go rogue.
No. I was happy to jump in there because I think, it is appropriate in terms of what do we do next and how do we take this forward. So if you think about this in terms of the long arc of implementing best practice to figure out where you are today and then engage in the discussion of where do we want to be tomorrow, I think, we're near that point where we're going to know at the end of, let's say this winter, exactly where we are today. And then we've talked about a number of different ways in terms of both bottom up, looking at the projects that we've got on the table today, how much improvement would that get us in overall quality and quantity of SEZ in the region, or looking backwards, which is including what some of the work with the Science Advisory Council did with us 2 years ago on this topic, in terms of which types, now that we acknowledge types, which types might you want to prioritize and how might that inform your future target for where you want to be. So I imagine those are discussions that we'll be bringing back to this group in the near future.
I just have a question for both of you. Based on Brendan's point, when you take something like Tahoe Keys, because I don't want that to be a precedent that somehow it gets a C. I'm struggling with that. And also there's a political part of me right now that's dealing with Tahoe Keys because of all the other issues that deal with Tahoe Keys, such as the invasive species and the work that we're putting into that. But yeah, I think some kind of weighting has to go in, or at least the addressing the unbelievable impact of that development on what I guess you would still consider to be an SEC, but how functioning really is it as a natural SEC with all the marina and all the channels that are dredged out of that and all the other issues? I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could have one easy way of doing it is basically, let me turn on the current imagery. So right now, the way that the boundaries are drawn, the Pope Marsh and the Tahoe Keys are all one, basically because that's historically they were connected, obviously. And Pope Marsh, like I said, is functioning at a decent rate right now. It's not severely impacted except for the development, of course, but that part is just gone. The part that exists is functioning according to our indicators. If we could just draw this boundary right between Pope and Tahoe Keys and call Tahoe Keys its own thing, and just in that there it would get a D in that case because there's nothing left of it, and that would take care of that issue. Does that make sense? It's just a matter of
That does make sense because it is exactly what happened is that all that development just gives it a nice D. Whereas yeah, I agree. Walking on Pope Beach and looking back into that marsh is quite different than Tahoe Keys. I mean, there is wildlife there. There's vegetation. There's, all sorts of things that are happening that not happening at the Keys.
right. Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think that's one of the few ones that's like that. And I would be completely happy to split those in two. It's always just this fine balance between.
Well, you could show the historical aspects of the thing. That seems like fine. That one time this was one big marsh, and it was an impact on the lake to lose that filter. But today, to allow the overall historic reach of that marsh to be considered a sea, which would include the developed Keys, I don't know. That's just hard to swallow. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised that nobody in the TAC said anything about this one, I guess.
But they're not government members.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Bill. In fact, when this slide first came up, before Sean even brought the issue up, it just struck me, based on my question on how we broke up stream segments. And, the thought was, when you see distinct differences and you break up the segments, I think there's a distinctive difference between the human environment, the human-built environment, and then Pope March. So it just seems logical, and I just think we should be consistent in how we do this, whether it's streams or meadows or marshes or what.
Yeah,
I think those are the type of adjustments, like as we work to finalize the layer, that's the type of thing we'll be, incorporating, reconsidering those boundaries. And then I think also discussing how we may more appropriately weight individual indicators, or if we want to weight the individual indicators as we take the next steps.
Yeah, for this side, I think it'd be better just to redraw the boundaries, because then Pope Marsh would actually end up with a good score, which is probably actually accurate, and then the Tahoe Keys would get a D. The only reason we didn't just exclude development from all sites is that a lot of sites have, like, especially some of the sites out, like some of the Myers Meadows areas, there's houses sporadically built within the SEZ, and so we didn't want to just take them out necessarily because they're kind of part of the meadow. So it was really hard to make like a consistent rule there. So in a few cases, it didn't work that well. And I think the Tahoe Keys one's a good example of that. But yeah, I'm going to make a note that I don't think anybody would have a problem with us splitting that in two to more accurately reflect the conditions. But I do think that that's the exception and not the rule. There's not many, most of the places I would say pass the smell test based on our partners reviewing them.
While we're on this topic, Sean, again, I appreciate kind of cutting off Pope Marsh, but if you look at the other side, on the Upper Truckee side as well, like the fact that a portion of the Upper Truckee Marsh includes the Keys, like it seems like the Keys is its own unit, right? And then, you should draw that line to a point where it's, encompassing the developed or the impacted area, and then allowing the areas that are outside that to consider on their own.
Yeah, I would be open to that. The other side of that argument, I guess, is that people might click on Upper Truckee Marsh and it would show up as 0% developed. And they say, wait a second, that's got tons of development. The Keys were built in there. What are you talking about? So there is kind of two sides of it. But I think the Keys are almost just so special because it's so like such a big development that's there's nothing left. Like some sites are like a house built on a meadow. That's way different from completely gone, you know? So I would be willing to take the keys out and treat it as a separate, completely D category.
I hate to cut off a productive discussion, but I think we've resolved where we're going to go with the keys. And I'm going to drag everyone back into everyone's favorite topic, which is our system structure, because I know you're all anxious to get back to that discussion. I guess before I do that, and while I'm waiting for my screen to share, I would say, you know, we've got a number of questions of why don't we just move faster, and why can't we just implement best practice if we think we know what that is? And I think, you know, the work Sean just described is, you know, more than 2 years of field work, compilation of data from tons of different partners. And that's all really the hard work that's required to implement best practice for one specific standard. And as Bob highlighted, that's only giving us the baseline. We still have a whole other discussion that we need to engage in next on, if we know where we are now, where do we want to go in the future? So with that as a prelude, I think hopefully everyone can see my screen again. I'm going to talk about system structure as it relates to our water quality threshold standards. And first, just start by talking about where we start.
Dan, if I could say, and so you could pass this on to your senior staffers. As one board member who was wondering how long was it taking to do this, and to have received the information that you sent out and look at that and realize, oh, wow, you guys have been doing a lot of work, but it's really way below the governing board's radar screen. And it would have been nice to have Sean make this presentation to the EIP committee as to what we're doing and how to deal with SEZs. So that would have been marvelous. That would have been very informative to the committee and any other governing board members that wanted to be involved in that. So I think that that's just really only the issue is that for Jim and I, who sat on Tui Swig from the start, it was all of a sudden we were working kind of on a quarterly basis, and then we stopped. And I just wondered why. But you know, it's pretty clear you guys have done an awful lot of work. It's great. We just never registered with all the other distractions governing board members have at times. So, but
No.
Thank you, Sean. I thought your presentation was wonderful. I really appreciate all the work that you've done. God, it really is, despite me beating you up on the keys issue, it's just that I thought just a really well done and a lot of work, and especially working with that TAC. That's great. Thank you. So.
I take it to heart, Bill. I mean, I think I also take responsibility because we've been talking about bringing it to the governing board when it's complete. And, you know, just the sort of collaborative process that we're working through to try to get agreement on the individual indicators has taken a fair bit of time, and perhaps that's delayed it too long such that the gap has been too big. So certainly think about when to agendize it going forward. I'm going to pull us back into water quality again, sorry. But please feel free to interrupt me as I go through here and talk about what's in water quality. So when we started this process with water quality, we had 54 threshold standards in the last threshold evaluation. And one of the things that was really noticeable about the water quality standard is the number that we were unable to reach attainment calls on. So 45 was by far the most of any category, as was 83%, are both incredibly high numbers. And that's not for lack of monitoring, that's not for lack of trying. A lot of it was because the standards lacked established baselines, and many of the standards conflicted with each other. What we came to refer to with the Science Advisory Council as overlapped with each other. So we'd have 2 or 3 different standards, both related to nitrogen loading to the lake. And so we've gone through a suite of processes with the Science Advisory Council where we've talked about the water quality standards, talked about the content of those standards, and gotten recommendations, again, to implement best practice to revise and update those standards. And through that, and we've shared most of these memos with this group at some point in the past, but through that, we've gotten a suite of memos that I think, being most generous to us, have been highly critical of the standards themselves. So this one contains a number of those where it talks about the corrosive influence of some of them, inadequate specificity, ambiguities, negative impacts of the standards. And I think it bears mentioning that because of our unique relationship with the Science Advisory Council, and because at its formation by the two states 5 years ago, the two states directed the council to engage with us and support us as we update our threshold standards and review them, that when we receive a critical report like that on what the content of the standards or our failure to implement a specific practice, the problem is not ours alone. The problem is both ours and the Science Advisory Council. So at each step of these, and when we got that last critical memo on the water quality standards, we said, okay, if you're critical of these, help us actually implement your suggestions. And that's really the subject of today's discussion with regard to the water quality standards. So a year and a half ago, the Science Advisory Council helped us articulate the adaptive management structure, the outline of these minimum criteria for threshold standards. And the most important one, I think, to focus on for today's discussion is this notion that the standards should be outcome-based. They should focus on what you are trying to achieve, not how you hope to get there. And it's with that in mind that I think you should review or view the entire Science Advisory Council report on this subject. Because the core of that report is all about what they called role assessment, which is we have these 41 threshold standards today. What role in a more appropriate design system would each of those standards play? And what role would they play if we implement our best practice? Where would those standards live within our system? And I think it's important to note that within the Science Advisory Council's framing, there is no inherent hierarchy in these roles. Strategies are not inherently better or worse than goals. Goals are not inherently worse or better than objectives. They all play equally important roles within a functioning system, and all require our attention. And so the core of the report, to answer this question, which of our standards are really outcome-based? What are we really driving towards? The council applied this framework that divided things into 4 different categories. And those categories are goals. These are broad aspirational statements of what we're trying to accomplish. Keep Tahoe blue, maintain a healthy forest. Then underneath that, we have specific objectives. So that's where we specifically articulate a specific and measurable version of what that goal is. What does it mean to have a healthy Lake Tahoe? It means that you have 100 feet of clarity. It means that you maintain primary productivity below a certain level. So these are the specific articulations of what that goal actually means. Below that, we have these things called strategies, which are sort of suites of ways that we hope to accomplish these things. How do we hope to restore clarity under the TMDL rubric? We hope to restore it by reducing fine sediment and other pollutant loading to that lake. That's a broad strategy, load management. Under the strategies, we have the specific tactics that we employ in order to get there. So how do we reduce pollutant loads? We do things like street sweeping. We install curb and gutter on our streets. We do the whole suite of activities that allow us to reduce overall loading. And so skipping right to the chase, when we applied this framework, or when the Science Council provided us that report, what it came down to is we have 10 threshold standards that are really focused on our outcomes. These are the things that we're really trying to accomplish, and the rest really play some other role in the system. And I'll work back from there. So that's the tease. How did we actually get there? So what they said is there's 3 different types of standards in your system today that really would be more appropriately recast in another role in that system. And those are standards that related to strategies, which really track the performance of your efforts. Those are tactics Those are individual things that we do. And broad statements of purpose. So these are your ultimate goals, but not articulated in a way that's specific or measurable. So they're very hard to actually objectively evaluate whether you're making progress. So the first of those are things that are related to assessing the performance of our actions. And as we were talking about in the earlier thing, within the water quality threshold standards, the standards related to assessing our performance are all about assessing the effectiveness of our strategies. And all of these individually relate to load management. And how do we know that they're not ultimate goals in and of themselves? Both looking at the historic documents and the articulation of these standards, attainment of each one of these standards is actually contingent on achieving another goal. So we're supposed to reduce fine sediment particles that are arriving into the lake until we've actually achieved our pelagic water quality goals. So we can tell that this is a means to achieve an ends. The end is good pelagic water quality, and the fine sediment load reduction, the nutrient load reduction, these are all means to that ends. And that's exactly the role that these load reduction standards play within the TMDL adaptive management structure. When you think about it, this is what the jurisdictions and the implementing agencies are required to achieve, specific load reduction targets. And they can achieve that through a number of different inputs or tactics. They can do street sweeping, they can implement best management practices, they can implement better road management where they're putting less abrasives on the road in the winter. The overall effectiveness of any of these is assessed by measuring the load reduction achieved by that. But that is not the ultimate goal. That is the measure of the implementer's effectiveness. The ultimate goal here, again, is to attain the clarity or improve the clarity of the lake. And this is one of the ways in which we hope to do it. So the suggestion here is not to reduce monitoring of these, but simply to move them over to that performance management category. The second relates to 14 standards that today relate to surface runoff goals or goals for groundwater discharge within the region. So these are standards that would apply to projects or rules of thumb for overall concentration coming out of culverts within the region, if you will. And they were established in order to help achieve these overall load reduction targets. So again, these concentration standards are related, are a precursor to calculating overall load, which is what we think really matters, and are there to establish rules by which projects must adhere to, and rules of thumb through which we think we will achieve these overall load targets. And actually, when the Code of Ordinances was updated, these were all included there because they specifically regulate what we expect of projects within the region. So the suggestion here is also quite simple. It's to retain these in the Code of Ordinances. They continue to provide guidance and regulate projects, but not to treat them on par or at an equal level with the overall goal of improving the clarity of the lake. The third set of standards that we're recommending moving somewhere else is standards that articulated what the Science Council referred to as an overall goal or an unmeasurable or aspirational thing. And these were all found within our aquatic invasive species threshold standards. So we have 7 standards today that relate to aquatic invasive species. There is one of those that relates to prevention. And the prevention standard, we think, stands on its own as a threshold standard. It clearly articulates the goal of the prevention program in a specific and measurable way. No new aquatic invasive species in the lake. That's clear, no worries. The suggestion is to retain. The latter 6 of those standards, so we're looking at standards 9 through 14 right now on our screen, all relate to the control program. And in our discussions of how those relate to control and how they establish objectives for control. What we ascertained was the first two of those standards really articulate the goals of that program: reduce the abundance of aquatic invasive species and reduce their distribution. And the latter four of those, water quality 11 through water quality 14, articulate our expectations for the benefits of reducing the abundance and reducing the distribution of those species. So we expect that if we reduce the abundance of AIS in the lake, that there will be ecological benefits to the lake, that there will be economic benefits, that there will be social and public health benefits. But all of those benefits are derived through our reduction of both the abundance and the distribution of those species. And so what the proposal includes for the AIS standards is that we retain three of these, those are the top three, as threshold standards: the prevention standard and the core control standards: reduce abundance, reduce the distribution. And that we move the last three, or the last four, to a combined statement of the overall aspirations, or a purpose statement for the AIS program that I'll discuss a little bit later. And so getting back to the very end, where does this leave us? So what do we have? What are our standards really focused on? And how should we be describing our goals to others in the partnership for what we're actually trying to do with water quality? And when we go through this, I think we can find 5 individual categories of what we're trying to do. The first is improving the clarity of those standards. So we have 1 standard related to deep water clarity and 2 related to nearshore clarity. Second, we have 3 standards related to controlling algal growth within the lake, both in the pelagic waters, the deep waters of the lake, and then within the nearshore waters of the lake. Third, there's a theme on preventing new AIS from becoming established within our lake. We have 2 standards then that specify the goals, the current goals for removing and controlling the existing invasive species within the lake. And finally, we have a goal to continue to maintain high quality in other lakes within the region. And that's the core of what the standards are today. And if you think back to the exercise in terms of how are we trying to build collaborative partnership around achieving these goals, we think these themes actually summarize that in terms of what are we actually trying to accomplish today.
Dan, could I leave that on?
Yeah, please.
Go back to that. Go back 1 slide. Thank you.
Yeah.
So on the prevent new AIS, that would be like our boat inspection, our cleaning, making sure that you come in, I don't know what the phraseology.
Clean, drain, and dry.
Right.
Yep.
And then the reduction issue is like what we're trying to accomplish with the test that we're now considering right now is going through environmental review at Tahoe Keys, which is to remove the existing AIS or in other places where we put down mats or other things. But so that would be the distinction, right?
That's correct. That's the distinction between the two.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we think they're 2 distinct goals and that you measure the progress towards them or the effectiveness of the efforts separately. So the prevention program can be totally successful without the control program being successful. And I think, I mean, since you brought me back to the slide, Bill, I think it bears mentioning. So the 2 control ones, so those are highlighted in red on your screen, the remove existing AIS. One of the things you'll notice as part of our recommendation is that we've flagged those specifically because the Science Advisory Council developed or identified them just as goals or aspirational statements, and really directed us to think more about how you would actually establish a specific and measurable standard for those that could be objectively evaluated so that we could, produce reports that objectively report on how well we're doing towards our overall goals for control.
Thanks, Dan, because I did have that question regarding AIS, and I'm glad Bill brought it up. Can you go to the previous slide?
Sure. This one, or back one more.
No, that one there. You know, I am following along. It's still, I mean, it bothers me a little bit, or a lot actually, that to have the threshold as these sort of amorphous goals of reducing the abundance of known aquatic invasive species. I mean, that seems, I don't know. I mean, a reduction of 0.0000003% is still a reduction of known species. But it doesn't seem to be that aspirational. Is there any thought as we go through this process to taking a look at some of these? Because I know that these in particular have been brought up in the past as maybe examples that we need to be more specific. And I do have that in the back of my mind that just seems not specific enough, regarding just to reduce distribution and reduce abundance without anything a little bit more detailed to it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it pains me just as much that they're not specific and measurable. And, the recommendation that we put in the staff summary, and maybe this wasn't clear enough, was to temporarily retain the water quality 9 and 10 while we develop a more specific and measurable one. Because I think, part of this effort and a lot of the work that we've done in the system structure was to actually quantify, or to have quantifiable standards, so that, exactly like you said, we're not debating every 4 years when the threshold evaluation comes around whether the 3 plants removed counts as reducing abundance or that's reducing the distribution. That we actually have an agreed upon quantifiable goal that the partnership is all actively working towards, and then we can objectively evaluate where we stand relative to that goal. So I would just like to highlight, the recommendation is to temporarily retain, which is going back to, I think, earlier meetings of this group, similar to what we said for some of the scenic standards, where we said temporarily retain while we develop better standards, specific and measurable ones to be.
Thanks, and I appreciate that. And I do remember that discussion from a little while back or months back. Didn't pick up on it in the staff summary, so I appreciate you clarifying, because
I also, it would be nice to have the thresholds push us, especially on this particular issue, because of the problem in the Keys. I think if we were to come up with an amount that that's gonna be, I don't know whether it's an annual thing or what it is, but it would be nice to have something that drives us to both from getting funds to help us do the work, but also to get projects like the Keys project underway. So anyway.
Yeah, and this is really great discussion in that, the AIS coordinating committee partnered with the California Tahoe Conservancy to develop an AIS action plan. And that plan specifically identifies specific metrics and sets targets. So and I don't have them in front of me, but it's like a 10% reduction of the known area. It is those are the type of values that I think that you guys are getting at, which I think makes a lot of sense. So acknowledging that this is definitely just a first step in terms of organizing structure, but when the agency moves on to setting targets, I think there's a lot of groundwork that's already been done with respect to AIS to kind of set those targets and move those things forward. And the Keys is called out separately, has some separate targets for it, which I think is totally appropriate. And again, I think there's some great foundation to move forward those specific details.
And I think, that's exactly what Dennis said, the AIS program lead at TRPA, when he was reviewing the proposal, and the action plan is specifically mentioned, again, as part of this recommendation that we should temporarily retain and then use the action agenda as sort of the core to kickstart that discussion about what do these standards, what's an appropriate standard here and what does that look like? I've got a couple more slides before I'll fully open it to discussion. If people are willing to indulge and hold questions for one more minute. I'll take the silence as a yes. So the other thing that we've done as part of this, looking at the system structures, we adopted the overall adaptive management structure for threshold standards. This is something that the governing board did in April of last year. And what that basically said is that all of our threshold standards underpinning those will be a foundation of, they'll be built off of conceptual models, which is a scientific understanding of how the different factors within the system influence one another, and it would influence threshold standard attainment, as well as results chains, which link our management actions to how we think they will affect the system and how they will eventuate threshold standard attainment or help attain and maintain the threshold standard. And as part of the recommendation, we put forward a draft document, what we called a threshold standard background. And a couple people have already pointed out issues to me with some of the elements of that that will be corrected as we go forward. But basically these background documents contain a couple different elements that I think we should highlight. So they contain the standard itself. They contain this broad statement of purpose. So that's something that the Science Advisory Council emphasized was really important for us to start articulating, that the overall purpose of the standards currently, and when I say purpose here, I mean how you would describe what the standard is for to someone who is uninformed or unaware of the basin. So to maintain healthy waters, that's why we have a clarity standard. So these statements of purpose, so as not confuse them with the goals and policies of the regional plan, and to avoid that semantic lack of clarity, we've called them statements of purpose, and we've provided an example here. After that, the example in the staff summary and staff packet is for the aquatic invasive species standards. After that, we compiled the conceptual models that we think contribute to our understanding of how aquatic invasive species are impacting the system today. And again, harking back to our discussions on how we might implement this overall system structure with conceptual models, results chains, all underpinning threshold standards. One of our goals was to not recreate the wheel, to borrow from best science and best practice where it exists and simply incorporate that in what we're doing. So we've included not a single conceptual model, but a number of conceptual models that capture different elements of the system. Beyond that, we've incorporated results chains into this document that capture existing management strategies and how we're monitoring what those strategies are contributing towards our overall goals. And the intention is that these background documents would be posted and linked to on our webpage for the threshold standards, and then updated regularly as additional information becomes available or as we change our management strategies, which would trigger an updating the results chain. So that is the final part of the presentation before you today. And with that, I think I'll open it to broader discussion or any questions that people may have. And if people want to, yeah, Brendan.
I had just a couple if I could. I think that was great, Dan, as always, very articulate. Just to clarify, so what you're looking for from this group is a recommendation to APC on your water quality threshold changes, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, I saw council's recommendations in one of the attachments. Does staff's recommendation differ in any way from council's? I think you talked about them, the Science Council wanting to remove those AIS goals. That might be one difference, but are there others? I didn't catch any, but I just wanted to hear it from you if there are any.
No, that's the primary difference. So the 3 AIS standards, I guess there's we have gone back and forth with the council about whether or not the prevention standard reflects a specific and measurable standard. With the prevention is no new AIS. And the council in their report said that that was not specific and measurable. I think we continue to think that that is specific and measurable. And then they had suggested that all of the AIS standards, including the two that we recommend to temporarily retain, are inadequately specified. So I think I would argue the recommendation is consistent with their overall, their assessment.
Okay, I thought so too in my reading of it. So it looks like in attachment B of of what you provided us, those are the proposed thresholds to remain. There's something like 10 of them. Will you at some point recommend that new standards be added? And I thought you were maybe planning to engage with some of the working groups under TIE to investigate maybe new measurable standards that could be added. I was wondering if that is the case, and if so, what you thought about timelines on that, or how that'll work process-wise.
Yeah, actually, so I might share my screen again just to answer, because I think it might be useful.
Unless you already answered that and I missed it.
No, you didn't. No. It's totally appropriate. So there's two different processes going on that we sort of alluded to within the staff summary, but perhaps not in a specific enough way. So the project with TIE, so with the new EIP focus areas, TIE has also adopted a similar and complementary structure that basically acknowledges the role of the EIP partnership as the implementers of the regional plan and as the ones that are doing the projects. So if you think about the screen right now, this notion of there are actions that we do, these are inputs, there are the expected impacts of those actions, which we measure to measure the effectiveness of those actions and assess the effectiveness. Those are outputs. And then ultimately there's the outcomes, which are our threshold standards. What the TIE process kicked off a couple months ago that we're, I think, engaging more in over the fall and into the winter is taking a firm look to ensure that the actions of all the EIP partners have both a tracking of the action and the effectiveness of that action, the outputs as well, to ensure that we can actually say with reasonable confidence which actions we're getting better return on investments on in terms of our overall investments, and which we maybe need to tweak in order to get better investment or better alignment or better outcomes from those actions. I think in terms of, that was what I imagine was the first part of your question. The latter was, we also look at new threshold standards? And I think, the answer there is also yes. So certainly within the AIS space, the answer is yes, more immediately. I think one of the things that this process revealed, sorry, I got to move you back over, with as part of the Science Advisory Council is once we drilled down to actually what's in the standards today, it laid the foundation for a discussion of, oh, is this everything we care about under water quality? Which is a question that, the scientists have been asked by the two secretaries in the natural resource departments in either state numerous times, and also established the foundation for discussion, even at the staff level of, our standards today focus, just taking the nearshore as a single example. The standards today focus on periphyton, which is attached algae. And there's more recent science that's suggesting that maybe we should be thinking about metaphyton and floating algae within the lake. And I think those are the types of discussions that we imagine will come of this. Once you have an informed sort of platform of what's in them today, we can have that conversation of, okay, is what was established as goals for us 40 years ago, does that still reflect everything we're trying to do? Is there more that we're trying to do today? And I think that lays the foundation for, discussing what additional thresholds may be appropriate.
Okay, so that process potentially could be lengthy, the adding of new, say, water quality thresholds.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the same way that, implementing best practice for SEZ is challenging and lengthy. You have a similar situation with anything within water quality. We have to go through our due diligence to ensure that we've got adequate information upon which we can set a standard, et cetera. So, I expect that to be a slower process.
Okay.
But I
Thank you.
think the hope is that, by clarifying what's in them today, that, that's a discussion that's easier for us to have going forward, where you can point out like, oh, this actually doesn't reflect what we think we're trying to do, or we're missing this, or we're missing that.
Yep.
And I
Okay.
would say that's true, beyond water quality. I think similar exercises are playing out right now for the forest health standards. I think you can think about the work going on under Tahoe West to actually articulate what they think meaningful goals for forest health are today. And the same thing for how we manage and how we measure the recreational experience within the region.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see this really as just as you said, Dan. I think the benefit of the restructuring is to actually hone the conversation a bit. Again, the discussion we just had about AAS is a great example. I think and algae is another good one. There are a lot of different ways, perhaps, that are a lot of different things that we care about, and a lot of different ways that we want to look at those. But trimming down the existing system or organizing the existing system in such a way that we can actually have that meaningful conversation is really helpful. So it's great to see the kind of continued application of the best practice to the structure. I do think that, again, I think I probably speak for several of us when I say it whets the appetite for some of these further conversations in terms of, is primary productivity really the most important thing of, measuring algae? These are the things that we need to get to. But I think fine-tuning the structure and making sure that we, put the standards or put the metrics in the right bins is critically important. And I'm glad you brought up that screen, because I see a big benefit of this approach to water quality is really fine-tuning the EIP performance metrics as well. And again, I know that's outside the realm of this group, and there's a whole nother suite of folks and groups that tackle that. But really, it's the two should be happening in parallel with respect to having the same conversation about performance metrics, right? Are these the things we care about? Are they tightly linked to the things that we're doing, and can we track and account for them? And are they actually meaningfully telling us something about the ultimate thresholds? So again, kudos for you and the council working together to kind of get to this point. Again, I think it's just be prepared, I think, for the ongoing question of like, okay, can we take the next step? And like you highlighted, there's a lot of work to get to those next steps.
Dan, can I ask?
Yeah, cool.
Just sort of tearing off of the nature of that conversation, I guess my question is appreciating that at this stage what you're trying to do is just capture what's already in there, not brainstorm about what else do we care about, what else should go in there. My question is, do you feel that the way that this is structured now, the threshold standards that would remain do in fact adequately capture everything that was in there? It strikes me that the current reference within the thresholds to like the state water quality standards, those speak more to water quality generally of the lake, not just clarity. And so that's just sort of an example of, has that really been captured? And then similarly, I think with the removal of the load reduction goals because of the TMDL, like, is that really adequately captured still in the thresholds that remain? I think that, I appreciate the effort that you guys are trying to consolidate and put things in the right buckets. So it's just a matter of wanting to make sure that at this point we're adequately capturing everything that is in fact there now within the threshold, so that all those other things, when they get moved, still have an umbrella that they kind of fit under within the thresholds.
And I think, so maybe to just take it in a couple parts. So the attainment of the other water quality standards, the suggestion is to keep that one as a threshold standard. That's one of the 10, it's number 10 for other lakes. And it's also, we've gone back and forth with the council, because so the bi-state compact sets minimum requirements for the regional plan. And one of those is to attain all state air and water quality standards, but provides the TRPA with the discretion to establish stricter ones. So, part of the question of the exercise was, what's the additional value of relisting some state standards, but not other state standards? Especially because, one of the things we uncovered during this is we currently reference attainment of state standards that no longer exist, because we haven't gone through, and because the states have gone through that exercise of more frequently updating their standards. I think for the load management standards in particular, I think all of those are captured. And one of the things we highlighted in the recommendation is that it doesn't actually change how we monitor the system, that we will, we're going to continue the primary monitoring that we do with regard to load through USGS and UC Davis, and actually have invested more in that lately to try to make the information more useful and more readily available to partners. And the link to the overall load reduction targets with regard to allocations also is retained within the regional plan. So that criteria remains. It was never linked to a threshold, because our thresholds for load reduction were always out of sync with the load reduction goals of the TMDL. So I think all of it is still there in the different elements of the system. But certainly willing to, if there's other parts or different parts to talk through how that works, we should continue that.
I guess my two thoughts in response, and then one other maybe note, is that I'd be concerned that the way that the water quality standards for other lakes is framed, I think, and what's remaining, it implies it's only for other lakes, not for Tahoe. So that, I think, is why it seemed like there should be a parallel threshold for the lake itself. And then in terms of the load reductions, I think I wouldn't disagree that the level of specificity that is in the existing thresholds probably can be put into these other buckets. But I personally would still like to see some sort of kind of more refined or more specific reference to the TMDL or to the goals that the TMDL is seeking to achieve more clearly within the remaining thresholds itself. And then third, which isn't quite in response because it's like sort of a looping back to something previous but related to this, is I think it would be helpful, given that the acknowledgement that the AIS standards, this is from what Bill and Jim were saying earlier, the way that they're written now, they kind of create the same vagueness problem that, say, the SED standard created when it was adopted, which I think you totally appreciate. And so it might be, I think it would be nice to perhaps consider indicating, maybe with an asterisk or with something within the remaining threshold, that those are, the intention is to be updating those within some time frame, to refine them to be more achievable, measurable, specific targets.
Can I just probe at the second one of those two?
Sure.
Which I had as specific reference to the TMDL as part of it. So you're talking about not because I think what we've gone through in this process is like the TMDL has an overall goal, which we have adopted as a threshold goal. That's the clarity goal. And then it's got an implementation structure, like basically like how we work towards that goal, that doesn't live on the same level of like the TMDL system, if you will. And that, so is the suggestion to retain the specific reference to TMDL load reduction targets in the, I guess, the concordant level of our system that the TMDL has, or that it's specifically to retain it as thresholds?
I guess that comment was probably my least sophisticated comment,
Okay.
or informed comment. So I don't know if I could answer your question. It's more, if in fact, and it's been a while since I've really thought in depth about the TMDL, but if in fact the only goal is clarity, I don't know if it is. I know that it's in part to meet the ONRW Tier 3 water quality status, which I think is beyond just clarity. So I see Bob's started his video up. So anyway, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not sure that I know how to specifically solve the issue that I'm presenting. I'm more just wanting to make sure that along the same lines as the other comments that I've made, that sort of program is somehow captured and under an umbrella within the thresholds that's clear and big enough to capture what we're doing with the TMDL.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I guess. Interestingly, the approach that's being proposed in terms of moving the load reduction standards themselves is actually more consistent with the TMDL. The TMDL doesn't set load reduction standards. The TMDL is a plan to meet the clarity standards. So the standard or the issue at question is clarity, and that is the TMDL goal. As Dan said, the load reductions, whether they be fine sediment or nitrogen or phosphorus, are part of the implementation approach to meet that goal. Now, those implementation elements are included in the regulatory structure for the water boards and for Nevada, but they're not set as standards. The state didn't set new standards with the TMDL. It was more a process to identify a mechanism to achieve the existing standards. So I guess what's being proposed here with respect to the thresholds is really putting the load reductions where they belong with respect to implementation tracking, as opposed to in the broader threshold standard perspective. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I appreciate that explanation. Like I said, it's been a while since I've thought much about the TMDL.
You and me both.
So I think if it really is serving the greater goal of clarity, and that's kind of it, then I think it probably is captured by the retention of the clarity threshold. So thank you.
Thanks. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, Dan, I think based on Nicole's comments and just my own reaction, when all of a sudden I was surprised to see how we had come from, what, 53 down to 10. And I certainly understood it as I read the staff analysis. I think as that's presented to the APC and then to the governing board is to explain, maybe through your the graphs that you put together or the flow charts that you put together, what happens, where do the rest of these pieces that are no longer part of the threshold standards, where would you find them? And in that analysis, you talk about it's in the regional plan, or as Bob just said, it's going to be in the implementation of the TMDL. Those kind of things I think would be helpful for the governing board to know where this is going, so the public would know also that all of a sudden we just haven't abandoned 43 prior standards. And I think that to me is something that's important that as it goes forward. Because I understood it as you just articulated today, and also in reading the material, the amount of work that you put into this, which is very helpful. I mean, that's one of the things I was hoping to get. 178 threshold standards was stupid. It was just really hard to deal with, you know. And why don't we drill this down to what is it we can accomplish? As I think your first or second slide, when we say when a threshold review that in 83% of them we don't know, that doesn't look very good. And it really is because there aren't any standards for us to measure against. I applaud you for the work you're doing. I just don't want this to be misinterpreted that we are somehow abandoning some kind of environmental carrying capacity thresholds embedded in our compact. And so I think that's just to be careful in how you put that together.
And I would agree with Bill. I think a document like that would be really helpful, like something that just shows really clearly, like these are now over here, these are now over here. I mean, I think it was clear in the stuff you presented, Dan, for sure, but it took some effort. And I think for like future going forward, it would be nice to easily track that stuff.
Yeah, I think some sort of tracking spreadsheet that we've done in the past for code and updates, et cetera, can be used for this as well.
It's on my to-do list. Actually, Jennifer Carr reached out separately and said we needed to have that table done. So I apologize for not having ready or that included in this staff packet. But definitely before we go forward to APC, RPIC, and the governing board, that'll be in there.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. It's really the table that started this whole effort, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was when we started, was when we took all of the thresholds as they existed in all kinds of weird forms and narratives and all sorts of things and put a new numbering system on them so that we could track them. And now that effort that seemed painful at the beginning is now kind of bearing fruit, because now we have a system to do exactly that and track them and fill in those blanks. And then for me to jump in and key off something that that Nicole said, and as did Bill, you know, when I looked at the surface runoff ones, and Nicole, you mentioned them. I had struggled with those because at first I was like, well, they are very specific, they are very measurable, and they are outcome based because they all start with the word achieve. But then I really had to think, and then also have a sidebar conversation with Dan about, you know, sort of what they were originally designed for, which was really what is now incorporated in the code. If you pull up the code, he references 60.1.3, I think. If you pull up the code itself, there they are. So these things existed before the code existed, when the thresholds were originally written. So they really don't need to be thresholds anymore. They're really used like permit limits. So they are more of a means to an end if you're looking at reduction of nutrients that are flowing into the lake and working on lake issues. But when I was first looking at them as being, you know, what did I say, Dan? They look like a duck and they quack like a duck. So they really look like thresholds to me. I had to shift my thinking between whether or not they were thresholds for the lake or whether they were thresholds for the streams. And if they were originally thresholds for the lakes, the lake, then it absolutely makes sense that they're in the code. They don't need to exist in two places. They really are more like permit limits. They don't need to be in the thresholds. But as we've been talking about, once all these things are stripped down to what truly are thresholds and not in other bins, then we really should be having a conversation about what in this context, what else do we care about besides the lake? Well, we care about streams, and we care about healthy streams. We care about healthy streams because of fish and because of macroinvertebrates and lots of other things that we've talked about today. So I think that that'll be really good to have that broader discussion about what else we care about. And I think that's where we pull in, okay, yeah, we really care about streams, not just because they feed into the lake, but because of their streams. And then I'm hopeful that thresholds about streams will then reappear. And these ones that we're eliminating right now aren't the right ones for streams. And we can have a different streams discussion someday.
And I think just to tear off that before I get to Jennifer Kwasnick's question, you know, one of the conversations we had with the Science Advisory Council did go back to what was the original intent and why were these standards adopted? You know, because Jennifer said, like, they look like a duck, they quack like a duck, like these concentration-based standards, but they were actually adopted not for aquatic life in the streams. We actually do have separate standards that were established for aquatic life in our streams. These were a management tool to assess progress relative to improving the clarity of the lake. I mean, I think one of the things that really became clear looking through the background documentation is how many of the original 54 were solely focused on management actions and assessing the effectiveness of efforts to improve the clarity of the lake. So I think that's part of it. Jennifer?
Which one?
I was thinking Kwasnick, but Jennifer Carr, sorry, did I interrupt you?
Nope, I put my microphone back off so the Jennifer Kwasnick could
Okay,
have her
making sure.
turn.
Yeah, first, I appreciate this discussion, and I want to say that I appreciate the enormous amount of work that has gone into this. And also, I'm really excited about all the SEZ data too. That was really fun. So, with regards to this, I want to follow up a little bit on something that Nicole said as well, is that we also could use more information just to clarify that, we're not losing any of the protections right now by eliminating the state standards, from the thresholds. And so it sounds like you have a plan, or you've already started working on a way to kind of lay that out. Another one is in terms of protection of the littoral zones. I know you're still planning to keep some of the numerical standards for littoral Lake Tahoe, but I just want to make sure that, we don't rely so much on TMDL, which is focused on mid-lake clarity, that we lose protections focused on the near shore as well.
We are definitely working on that crosswalk between where does it live in the system today and where will it live in the system of the future. For the littoral zone standards, the suggestion is to keep all of the littoral zone standards for right now. So there's 2 clarity standards and then the periphyton standard. The suggestion is to retain all of those as threshold standards. Just to clarify, I mean, there's a fair bit of discussion about updating, especially the clarity standards, because they're probably based on outdated data. But I think that, that sort of moves into this separate discussion of the content of the standard, not the appropriateness of the overall category of standards.
All right. Well, again, thank you for putting all this together.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, suggestions, comments? I don't know if silence is the end of the day or the
start of hopefully a motion process.
I guess that was my question: is do you need a motion? What is your preferred process for moving forward?
I will share my screen again. Yeah. So the motion would be to recommend to recommend that we carry forward with these suggestions. So you'll note, can everyone see my screen again?
No.
Yep.
We back? Okay. Let me go down to the motion at the end. So the motion would be that there's 2 parts of the motion. Sorry. The first is that we implement the recommendations as articulated and modified, and then the packet you have is not yet complete to bring forward because we have not included background documentation for all of the thresholds that we're retaining. So the second part of the motion would be to direct us to actually continue to implement the system structure as articulated and add the background documentation. And we could add a third motion here which would be the development and articulation of the crosswalk table, for lack of better words, or the tracking device that we can assure nothing is lost.
I think that third one could be made part of the first motion.
Okay. Do I have a first for the motion? Or would someone like to make the motion? Adding that language?
So moved.
Do we need to say it, John Marshall?
No, I think this is a working group. But you don't have to, you can just have a voice vote, and that sounds like it's presumed with Bob's motion.
I'll second it if that's needed.
Okay.
No, just
okay. I vote aye.
Can I make just a couple comments before I give, I think, a nod of the head?
Please.
I would support that with the understanding that the table or the crosswalk table does in fact confirm that we're not losing anything. And I would like to also, my nod would be subject to my request earlier about the water quality standards for Lake Tahoe, other water quality standards being retained in the thresholds. Also the asterisks on AAS being work in progress. And also I just have to qualify my participation here is at my personal kind of staff level, not via the Attorney General himself. So with those caveats and qualifications, I would also support moving forward.
We appreciate the I don't know, the engagement either way.
Maybe an easier way of doing this is, it seems like the group consensus is to move forward. Does anybody object to moving forward the implementation and recommendations? We've noted Nicole's qualifications for her. And so if anyone else has other comments, or please indicate that you don't desire to see this move forward as suggested in attachment B with the added spreadsheet, tracking spreadsheet. Silence. All right, we'll take that as a way to move forward onto our pick. Dan, do you want to kind of shepherd number 2?
I thought we were doing motions for both together.
Oh,
Is there, I guess I'll do the same motion. Are there objections to the background documentation, notwithstanding errors that have already been pointed out to me in the AIS one? Or does that capture, I guess, the intent, or do people have concerns or changes they'd like to see? And if there's only head nods, I'll assume that we go forward with that, and the next time you'll see a complete package.
Can you just, I totally agree. I'm just curious, can you add a little more clarity on, and you don't have to say yes, but I was just really curious to hear about the future process of adding more thresholds. And I just didn't see that really articulately written, but I think folks would be interested in knowing that there may be more to come, and that going down to 10 does not mean that this is done.
Yeah, I guess the question is how best to share that. I feel like that is the overall intent of the threshold update initiative writ large. And so, is it timeline for engaging on it? Like, what specific clarity?
I don't have a great, answer for that, I guess. I don't know exactly where to put it, and it could be part of your presentation at APC. I just want to make sure it's a little more explicit.
Okay.
Yeah, Brendan, there's nothing about either of the moving these 2 things forward that in any way restricts staff, this committee, or other committees of the board from moving forward on other, either adding or updating other thresholds. So it's just kind of neutral to that effort.
Okay.
I would agree, though, that I think it might be helpful for probably other members at APC and the board, but also the public, to just have it be really clear that this isn't an effort to define everything that is of concern. It is simply trying to consolidate what's already been defined. I think that could be made clear, and that would be good.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Bob.
That's okay.
I think it might be good for that question to be considered by Joanne and some of the leadership at TRPA, because we're asking for what could be quite an outreach effort and a fairly heavy lift for brainstorming and creating and researching and developing brand new thresholds. And so I would certainly want to hear from that the TRPA leadership team as to how does that fit in with their annual work plan and the charge of the different work groups, and how does that fit into their strategic priorities? Because this effort to clarify what we have is a clear mission for what we're doing, but developing brand new ones is tangentially related but might be a whole nother project in and of itself.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, it's become clear to me that this is just part of that that mundane structural discussion that Dan started the entire meeting with. That I think that, again, and I think you can present it as such to APC and RPIC and others, that we're not looking to fundamentally change the standards or or rejigger the water quality thresholds in such a way that changes their intent or their value. It's actually just applying the system structure to make more sense of the existing set. Because again, I think that when I approached this, I thought I had that notion too, that we were sort of like revisiting the water quality thresholds writ large, and I don't think that's what we're doing here, right? We're essentially working with the existing water quality thresholds, applying the system structure and the council's recommendations to them to rebin and reorganize the information that we have. The question of making more defined AIS standards or more effectively tracking nearshore conditions or all these other variables, like those are, I think Jennifer is right. Those are big lists and big questions. And I think it's important to make clear that that's not what you're doing here. You're basically just working, it's a system structure discussion applied to the water quality thresholds.
Right, and there's nothing in this that precludes, at the conclusion of the nearshore effort, the AIS effort at Lake Tahoe West, at our rec rec initiative, from though we anticipate if it's necessary or if it's the will of the community, the governing board, to move forward with threshold updates regarding those topics. So this is in no way, and I think specifically to some of your all's concern, this is in no way precluding consideration of additional thresholds or additional updating of AIS thresholds or whatever it is that that there's work to do.
It's not lessening or increasing the existing protections or assessments, correct? It's just restructuring them.
Correct. And I'll be more clear about this as we bring it forward to the next venue and in the next staff summary. I mean, also to Jennifer's point, this group and other groups prioritize the 4 categories that we were going to address substance on initially. That being VMT, SEZ, recreation, and forest health. So again, this effort really is just implementing the system structure. And I think, consistent with how we're working with other efforts that are going on, I know the 2 states have directed the Science Advisory Council to think about what we're doing in the water quality space and if our current goals reflect the overall goals for water quality today. And I think we imagine that we'll tear off of those discussions for future discussions as well.
When will this go to APC, Dan?
That's a good question. I need to reevaluate my own workload. I think we need to do the sanity check on our own that develops the crosswalk to ensure that nothing's been lost, and then probably sit down and identify the amount of review that is necessary, and then work that into the timeline.
Okay, thanks.
Did I obfuscate enough there?
Well, it sounds like you possibly can push this over to Mark Bruce's time. That'd be fine.
Okay, noted. If there's no more questions, I really appreciate everyone's time, attention, effort, and all the good suggestions. And I'll apologize for ending 5 minutes late.
Well, thank you again, Professor Segan, for another interesting 101 on TRPA thresholds. Excellent. Thank you.
I'll try to make sure the next one's not 18 months out.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Dan.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dan.
Have a great night.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.